podcast called Jellison Podcast.
He probably doesn't remember this at all.
Yeah, we work together. It's easy.
This is kind of real, like holy shit.
And so it's really cool to get to be a part of that.
Hey, you know how it is, bro. Hey, when
you now tune into the biggest ever.
We're not here just to take part. We're here to take over.
I don't remember that. That's crazy.
What's up, everyone? We're back with episode 127 of the Jellison Podcast, and a returning guest, the great and powerful Derek Schultz. Derek, how are you?
I don't know about powerful. I'll take great, but I appreciate being back on your show, Dub. How are you, man?
I'm doing great. Hey, I stole that line from Joe Rogan, and I love it. I don't know why.
Nice. Yeah.
I like to say it.
I know. Look, I know he's not for everybody. He says some things that I can't get on board with, but clearly he's a guy that knows what he's doing. So I'll give him credit for that. He's built quite the empire over there.
Yeah, I mean, he's the reason I got into podcasting, and yeah, recently it's been hard to be a fan of his. I haven't really watched a whole lot of his stuff, but you know, it is what it is. But I mean, how are you? I mean, talk about you're still doing Query and Schultz with Jake Query, of course. You got the podcast. You're still doing your writing thing. Just talk a little bit about what you're doing. Yeah,
it's been cool. You know, I've had an interesting year after a really interesting 2020. Everybody had an interesting 2020, right? And I kind of just decided, okay, I'd like to get a job and then try to just stay active and do all this other stuff on a freelance basis. And so about a year ago, almost exactly a year ago, in fact, I got a job, full-time job in sports. Technically, it's with it's Sports Network, but it's more behind the scenes with ISC Sports Network. I do some communication stuff. I manage all the content for the website. Bunch of boring stuff that I'm not going to, it's not fun to talk about on the podcast, right? But that's like my quote unquote 9 to 5. And then they've allowed me to go out and basically do whatever I want as far as side projects. So Query and Schultz and keeping that alive. And Jake, of course, as many know, is back on the air now, which I'm just thrilled for him about that. But they've decided to let us continue that show, which is great, because I was originally thinking there's no way they're going to let him do this still, right? And they're like, well, it's a radio show, TV show, it's different. So I was like, okay, great. Because we've had Q&S going for 10 years, and it would have been I would have happily said goodbye because I'm thrilled for Jake and this opportunity, but it's nice to keep that going. And then kind of what you're doing with the podcast. I love talking to people, and I love that aspect of it, interviewing. And so the Schultz Star Show with the Indy Stars is just kind of basically a one-on-one interview, and more of a get to know you thing. We talk sports, but I'm just interested in people and backgrounds too. Like how did you get here? Like, you're the beat writer for an NFL team, or you're the play-by-play guy for an NBA team. Like, how did this happen in your life? Because there's so many people that want to do this, stuff like that, I think has been really cool. And then really, and it may surprise you to hear this, the most fun I've had and the most rewarding thing that I've done in the last year is the Indy Monthly writing stuff. It's challenged me. It's not something that, this stuff kind of comes naturally to my background's in radio. So this is like riding a bike for me. Whereas writing was something that I always wanted to do. And I was always kind of scared to do it because I was like, oh, are people not going to like this? And there's something about it that's so like set in stone. Like it's there, you said it, I can go back and read it. Whereas like a podcast or radio, you can listen to a recording, but for the most part, you say something and it just kind of floats away. Writing is so permanent. So I've really enjoyed doing that with some people that are way, way, way smarter than I am and edit my stuff to make it sound like it's good. But it's been a lot of fun. It's funny that you bring that up because I think everybody starts to reflect. We're almost in the holidays and you think about the year that was, and it's been a challenging year, a different year for sure, but it's been really fun and really rewarding.
Well, I'm the exact opposite, because when I was starting the podcast when I got on with Hammer and Rails, but I was literally terrified. Like, for anyone that knows me, I don't say anything to anyone in class. I sit in the back. Every single class, I'm finding that back seat. Yeah. Don't say anything unless the teacher says something to me. And I mean, writing was easy for me. And then doing this, I've obviously gotten more comfortable. But I mean, there was a guy, I feel bad now because he's a good dude and I've talked to him before, but I asked him to come on the podcast like early, like 2 or 3 episodes in. And and he said that he could only do like Zoom or Skype or whatever. And I was like, no, I don't really want to do that because I didn't want my face to be on there because I was that terrified. And now my face twice or however many times a week I post, my face is out there now.
That's funny. Yeah, it's always just kind of been like this natural thing for me. We all have our things like, I'll bring him up again, even though I hate mentioning him all the time, but Jake actually, and no one knows this and you would never know this, he hates public speaking. And you're like, what, dude? Like you MC events all the time. You've had a radio show for like 20 years, IndyCar and all that stuff. He does not like it. And so whenever we would go together and do anything, so MC something, go talk to a class, I'd have to talk first because he'd be like, dude, you take it. And I'm like, man, all these kids were born in like 2005. Like, how can you possibly be intimidated by this, right? And so it's funny, we all kind of have our quirks about that. But yeah, I was just real self-conscious about writing, but I've never been self-conscious about like my maybe the size of my head, but my voice or my face. I've always been kind of real comfortable with cameras and microphones.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like I took we were talking before we hopped on here about our struggles to begin our college careers. So I did take my speech class for the second time, and it was after I started the podcast and kind of got some guests and whatever. And we had to do these like impromptu speeches. So the teacher literally picks some random person in the class, and you have to go up and talk about something. And praise God for me, they said, what are some of your hobbies or interests or something like that? So I said podcasting, and everyone like looked up because I had never said a word in that class. It was crazy.
Yeah, it's like who's that kid in the back that's
I know.
suddenly interrupting things. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I would never expect Query to have a fear of post because he loves to talk.
Yeah, and he loves himself, so you would think that he'd be real comfortable with doing that. But yeah, that's something that's always kind of thrown him for whatever reason. I've always gotten a kick out of it. It's really funny.
But going back to, all the different things you do, I feel like it's really important for people getting into the business now in the industry, I guess, to be that kind of Swiss Army knife. You can do a little bit of everything because, getting in, that gets your foot in the door, and then you kind of find your niche. I was talking to Jerry Palm about that the other day. I met him at the Purdue-IU game, and he was like, yeah, it's good to, have like a wide range of variety when you're getting in, but like eventually you're going to have to find that niche.
Yeah. And he did, because some people will think of him as the bracketology guy, which I know he does too. I think of him as the bowl projections guy. I don't remember anyone doing those before. Maybe there were, I don't know, but the first person that I remember looking up, I think it was still CBS Sportsline. That's how long ago it was Jerry Palm bowl projections. And I remember looking up because he would predict who was going, and he still does it, to what bowl. And that's, that and like bracketology, RPI, like all that stuff. I always think of Jerry, Purdue guy, by the way, as you know. And another guy that, it was a self-admitted band geek, you know what I mean? Kind of awkward and all of that, but he's made a great career for himself. But yeah, to get back to your original point, I think we've kind of talked about this, like being a Swiss Army knife and putting yourself out there in a lot of different things. Of course, all of that is advantageous, but I just think that we're getting to a point now where everyone just kind of owns their own stuff, like it's good to have a platform that's somebody else's. Like it's still great to be on ESPN and say, I'm an ESPN anchor, analyst, whatever, Bleacher Report, Barstool, whatever else can kind of amplify you and amplify your voice. I'm not saying that that's a bad thing, but I think where we're kind of heading is this model like you have with your podcast, where it's yours, you own it. People know where to find it. They don't need to go maneuver their way through some other platform or switch to a certain channel to kind of get it. There's so much stuff that's just a la carte now, and people know it's so hyper specific and individualized for each person, and they know how to access that. And I think that's just going to kind of continue here. To me, the standard there would be like what Pat McAfee is doing, where he's got the show, he's got WWE, he's got ESPN, he's got all this other stuff, but it's all his. Like, yes, he's employed by these people, but it's him. You know what I mean? It's Pat McAfee. It's not ESPN's Pat McAfee. It's not WWE's Pat McAfee. It's Pat McAfee's Pat McAfee. And while given his NFL fame from being a punter and having that public platform, he's parlayed that, and not every, you and me can't do that. Yeah. That's not a model that everybody's going to follow. I do think that that's kind of where we're heading, where, even this idea of radio stations and, maybe these guys just go off on their own and say, hey, why give my station a cut of this? It's me. People are listening to me. Why do I care about, the guy that's on before me or the gal that's on after me? I'll just keep all this advertising money for myself. And, it's kind of a selfish way to look at it, I guess, but I think that's where things really are trending over the next, 10 to 20 years.
Mm-hmm. Hey, I mean, you got to get yours at the end of the day. One thing that I don't think I've ever said this, but out like publicly, but one thing that pisses me off about some of those guys, like I love Pat, like I watch the show every day, but when he tries to talk about like, oh, I built this from the ground up, it's like, I mean, you really didn't. I mean, to a certain extent, yes, but I mean, he had that built-in audience just from the Colts and his personality. So he got fame through there, and then he was able to parlay it, like you said. But for someone like me, and I mean, I know through this, I've met tons of people that have their own podcasts. I mean, it's hard to get notes, especially someone that's trying to do what I'm doing. That's not really trying to go after those flashy headlines and the clickbait and all that BS. So I don't know. I guess I'm just ranting.
Yeah, it's tough because it's like it's cool that you can just have a YouTube channel and a microphone and have a platform now, whereas you couldn't have that 15 or 20 years ago. But at the same time, the flip side is it's such a crowded space. It's like, oh, I have a podcast. Well, guess what? Everybody's got an effing podcast. You know what I mean? Like, great. So what? But yeah, with Pat or with like this whole idea, I think we're kind of re-examining this whole idea of self-made and I did it, because like I told you, I think of myself as a hard worker. I'm proud of that. And I'm proud of kind of where I've gone in my career. My parents have been married for 50 years. They paid for my college education. I had 0 loans. I'm a white kid from an upper class family in suburban Connecticut, Christian male. You know what I mean? Like life's been pretty good for me. Like I don't know if born on third hit a triple, but I was definitely born like rounding second base. You know what I mean? I had an extra base hit out of the womb. And it's something that took me like into my 20s to kind of realize, hey, a lot of people don't have the reason that I was able to go for this is because I wasn't writing a check to Sally Mae, you know what I mean? Every month for whatever, $600 or whatever it is, because of student loans or car payments or, any of this stuff. I mean, I was so fortunate to have that backing, and not only the financial support, but the love and the nuclear family and all of that. And I just, you kind of realize that for everything great that you accomplish and that you do in your life as a man and maybe eventually for you as a father, whatever, it's rooted in a base that was built for you by other people around you. And that's something that I've always, especially now and later in life. I mean, I'll be 39 here in February, so scarily approaching my 40s here, but that's something that I've tried to be more cognizant of and really more appreciative of here lately.
Yeah, I mean, you and me are pretty much the exact same in that way. Like I've always had my parents have always been there for me, always provided for our family. I've always had I've had my grandmothers. My grandfathers either were passed away or weren't in the picture. But yeah, I mean, that speaks to a deeper issue though. People not really understanding how good we have it. I saw a stat. It's kind of off topic, but I saw a stat that said like if you make $30,000 a year, you're in the top 1% of the world in wealth.
Yeah, it's wild, right?
That's crazy.
Yeah.
And like we just take that for granted. So yeah.
If you're making 30 grand in New York City, you can't pay rent.
Exactly.
Here in Indiana, you might be able to get by, but even that, I mean, that's, if we're talking $15 minimum wage, that's even below that mark. So yeah. And all these things, not to turn your show into like Meet the Press or anything, but $15 minimum wage, like all this other stuff, like paid leave for parents, and these things that are now topics nationally have kind of blossomed from all this, because we've kind of gone back and re-examined and said, hey, wait a minute, that's not right. Like, if you work, you should be able to eat, right? You should be able to put a roof over your head. What's the deal with this? So I don't know, it's at a snail's pace, but I think we're making some progress in those areas.
Hopefully we keep doing that. But I consider myself lucky every day. There's never days I wake up and I'm like, this sucks, I have to go do this, except if it's something I hate, like running, which I've been doing this week and I'm very sore. But
it's the worst.
How have you been settling into this new chapter of your career, and how long did it take you to kind of accept, like, all right, things are going to change, that whatever happened with Query and Schultz and iHeartRadio is out of my control, I got to move on and do something else now?
Yeah, the control part was the hardest part for me, because I've always kind of firmly been in control. That was the first time getting laid off. Now, it was a nationwide layoff, like there were a lot of people that were affected by that, not just us. But still, it's still, that and 50 cents gets you a copy of the paper, right? Who cares? Layoff is still a layoff. So I think once I kind of got over the fear of, oh my God, what the hell am I going to do? And started kind of laying out a plan for myself. That's when I started kind of figuring out, okay, what can I do here that'll make me happy? And almost immediately after the radio show ended, I decided that I'm just going to try to get a job and then try to do everything else on the side. And I was even to the point of thinking to myself, I think I'm just going to leave sports. I know a lot of television people who have transitioned into communications. Eric Halverson, he's a communications executive for Kroger, is a former TV anchor. Alexa Green, formerly at Fox 59, who did mornings, has now taken the job as the head of comms for IMPD. I applied for a PR job at IU Health, where Beth Resner, who used to work at Channel 6, and Jeff Switek, who used to work at the Indy Star, a lot of these people had taken media careers and the skills from that and gotten into comms, because if you're a media person, what do you know how to do? Deal with the media, right? And, I'm throwing out all these applications all year in 2020. I'm like, hey, PR, comms, whatever else. And everybody just kept kind of going to me. So they're like, sports radio, huh? So why do you want this job? And it was, I tried to explain to him that, look, like talking to people, crafting a message, writing, knowing how people perceive things, like that's all part of, having an audience for 12 years on the air. You know how people are going to react to things. Now, I don't say things based on how I know people are going to react, but I know when I say something, what the reaction is going to be. And so that's a good skill to have. You have a lot of practice having that. So I actually was a finalist for a job at IU Health. And there were a couple of others where I took 2 or 3 interviews. I mean, I cast a really wide net. I probably wrote like 80 freaking cover letters. It was just awful. And, 90% of those don't even get answered. But, and I was appreciative of everybody. I think I would have been happy anywhere. But then this job opened up with Greg Rakestraw at ISC, who's been a longtime friend of mine. And I already had my foot in the door there, having taken Query and Schultz there after we had a podcast deal with Wish TV that just kind of fell through at the last second. And so everything ended up working out. That plan, even though there were bumps along the way and all of that, was followed through on. But I think the biggest thing for me was that, I've been so focused on being Derek Schultz, the sports media star. And that's been such an obsession of my life through my teens and through my 20s that, when I woke up laid off at 36 and about to have a international pandemic, I kind of realized, hey, wait a minute. I don't think I need this. If this is gone, yeah, I'll be sad. Like, I still want to do this. But I used to tell people, if I got fired tomorrow, I got to go to a Super Bowl and scoop up some confetti after the Giants won. And I got to interview Patrick Ewing. So 6-year-old me is all set. Like, I'm good. I did it. I accomplished what I set out to do when I was in first grade. And I just wanted to follow through on that. I wanted to be like, I didn't want that to be a lie. You know what I mean? Like I wanted that to be the truth. And so mentally I had to prepare myself for that, but I'm just really happy that I've been able to kind of navigate it and figure out how to stay out there, even if it's not in the way that I was used to staying out there via radio for, however long it was, 12 years.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, credit to you, because a lot of people are scared to make that jump. And I mean, you can apply it to anywhere in life, but
I mean, I got pushed out of the boat, but yeah, that's why I made the jump.
No, I'm saying at least accepting the idea of like, hey, I don't have to be in sports. I can go somewhere out of my comfort zone that I've never really done before.
Yeah.
Because a
lot
of people won't do that.
Really, it was just like, what the hell am I going to do? Because there are, let's see, well, I guess now that Jake in the morning show is a 2-man show, there, at the time there were 5 on-air jobs and all 5 were filled in a city with 1 million people. And I'm rooted here. My son's here. My wife's got a great job here. Like my parents are here now. They're in Carmel. So like, I wasn't going anywhere. Right. So, part of it was just, I just need to find any kind of a job, where do my skills translate? And that I just saw a lot of media people doing that. So I thought, okay, maybe I'll take a shot at this. So I took a shot and it was, kind of an air ball. But it ended up working out at the end of the day, which everybody told me ad nauseum was going to happen. This would be the best thing to ever happen to you. And I was like, God, shut up. Like I'm working at Amazon for $15 an hour during my non-compete because I just need to get out of the house. Like, stop telling me stuff's going to work out for me. And, but they ended up all being right.
Hey, I have a friend that works at Amazon right now. He makes bank.
That was a lot of fun, man. And it was one of those things, like we talk about the, privilege and all of that. Like it wasn't luckily we had a lot squirreled away and I had severance and all that stuff too. And we had always been good about saving in debt, mostly because, mommy and daddy paid for my school. So I just took it because I started busting tables when I was 14 and I've never really not worked. And that's not to say, well, everybody needs to go out there and work, I'm not trying to be that guy. I'm just telling you, like, mentally, that's where I've always been. I've always needed to have when I wake up in the morning, okay, what am I doing today? I needed to have something for that. And I met some really cool people there from all types of different backgrounds and races and everything. And it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun to have a job again, where when you clock out, that's it, it's over. And you don't take it home with you. And then you clock in the next day. You know what I mean? Like, I've never really had a job like that because I'm always doing something or thinking about something, what's going to happen next. And so it was weirdly like a serene feeling to just have that be the job and only be the job when you're on the clock.
Yeah, that's a weird thing about, this industry, the whole sports media thing, is you're never off the clock. If you go home, like say you do your radio show, you go home and you don't get on your phone, you don't watch TV. You wake up the next day and you're like, what the hell happened? You got to catch up on literally every single thing that happened. And well, not every little thing, but at least like the Colts games or Pacers games or IU basketball, Purdue basketball, whatever. You're never really off you have to be at least active and paying attention and trying to keep one foot in the door, one foot out the door, trying to balance a bunch of different things, honestly.
Yeah, it's a challenge because it's like, and I literally do this sometimes where I'm like, oh, well, I tweeted about the Indiana St. John's game, so I got to make sure that I tweet about the, Purdue, North Carolina game. You know what I mean? It's like, or else people are going to say, hey, why aren't you tweeting about this? It's kind of a selfish thing to think that way. Like, people are worried about what I think about the game, which I don't think really is true, but you just want to try to always have your voice attached to everything.
All right, because that brings up something I wanted to talk about. A ton of Purdue fans have been ripping on the Indy Star about being the IU Star, quote unquote. Listening. Do you think that's a real thing? Because being from Indianapolis my whole life, it has felt like they've kind of favored IU, but that's just because you talk about Bob Knight and all the success that IU had basketball wise. I know it's not the same for football. And then, up until what was that, 2013, 2014, that's when Purdue kind of, got back into relevancy after DeJuan and Eastwan and all them left.
I've always felt like it's kind of, to make a comparison, I think people in the Midwest will connect with. It's always kind of been like a Cubs White Sox thing. The White Sox have an unbelievable, passionate, great long-term fan base and a history that's very similar to the Cubs. Like when you really stack those teams up, you know, that's why I don't make a Yankees Mets comparison, because the Yankees have won umpteen championships and the Mets have what, 2. So, you know, Cubs and White Sox historically, for the most part, stack up pretty well. You know, both have won 21st century championship, right? So I'm not calling Indiana and Purdue losers necessarily, but, you know, like 2 comparable teams. But it's just feels like there's just more of a broad appeal. And I think the numbers, you know, we have analytics, you can see clicks and listens and views, and they study this stuff. And there's more of a broad appeal for Indiana than there is Purdue because of the fact, and I think you see this in other states where there are 2 big colleges. Have you ever heard the term Walmart Wolverine? Where I went to Michigan State. I have this Michigan State shirt because I went to Michigan State. You have that Michigan shirt because you went to Walmart and bought it. Like that's kind of like Indiana, right? Where people who root for Purdue largely are people that went to Purdue or people that grew up in Tippecanoe County. Whereas people that root for Indiana might not have ever gone to Indiana. They grew up in Jasper. Maybe they didn't even graduate high school. You know what I mean? Like that's more of a general fan base. And this is coming from an IU grad. So I'm not trying to like knock that. I'm just saying like, there just seems to be more of a wide appeal. There are more people that root for Indiana that I think don't have a tie specifically to Indiana than do Purdue. And I think that's where it comes from. It's just tough, man. And I do it all the time, where it was really important to me, especially at NDE, where we were the co-flagship of Purdue sports. It was really, really important to me to embrace that relationship. And I knew that people knew that Jake and I both were IU grads. And so it was just really important to me. Not that I've ever really, I mean, when I was 20, I guess I did like care about that whole thing. In my professional life, really, I've tried to shoot it straight because people may not believe this, but it really is true. I'm equally emotionally invested in both of those teams. Really, I am. And a lot of that has to do with the relationships that I built at Purdue with Elliot Bloom and Chris Foreman. And, you know, Matt Painter's a great dude. Like the best example of this is I was down in Louisville when they lost to Virginia. We did the show down there before their final Sweet 16 game against Tennessee. And we drove back down on Sunday or whatever day Saturday. I don't remember which day that was. And when they lost that game to Virginia, not to bring it up, Dub, I'm sorry. I was like emotionally, you know, I wasn't crying, like weeping. I was sad. Like I was gutted. I felt like somebody punched me in the stomach. And I called my wife on the way home to tell her, hey, honey, you know, I'm on the road. I'm on 65, whatever. And she's like, what's wrong with you? And I said, I don't know. It was tough. And she's an IU grad. And she's like, Purdue lost. It was great. What are you talking about? It was tough. And I said, honey, like, I don't feel that way about them anymore. Like, you know, like I really wanted them to win. I wanted to root for the people that I'm friends with, and a great program and great guys and great kids. And, you know, think about where Ryan Klein was as a freshman compared to who he was as a senior, especially that night against Tennessee. And, you know, I was just really connected to that story. And so, you know, this is a really long-winded answer to your question, but I really tried to present it as neutral as possible. And it's hard because I feel like I've always been harder on Indiana because it's been important to me to be like, okay, I'm going to be tough on IU. You know, because I had another guy call me like a Jeff Brom homer, and I'm too hard on Tom Allen. I'm like, he's too, like, what do you want me to do? But that's the way I've approached it. And I think it's hard for the star guys. You know, I think Greg Doyle's written some great stuff. Greg Doyle's written stuff about Indiana. He's been right about Indiana sometimes. He's been wrong. He's been right about Purdue. He's been wrong. They have, you know, not a dedicated Purdue beat writer that's in the office, right? They take the stuff from the Lafayette Journal-Courier. So some people have a problem with that, with you know, but Carm's been on the beat forever. So who better to use it than his stuff? So I think it's a general appeal thing. I just think you're reaching more people with IU, and B, I do think there's a genuine effort, whether people want to believe it or not. I'm just kind of speaking for myself and some of, I guess my colleagues, but I know all those guys and gals, and I know they tried as much as possible to make it a 50-50 thing, but it is tough sometimes.
And I mean, it doesn't, personally for me, I didn't really care too much when I mean, when all those people were getting all butthurt about it. So I was just like, hey, I mean, it's not impacting us winning or losing. I mean,
I think it's always kind of been like Purdue sports has been at their best when no one is expecting anything out of them. Mm-hmm. Now, let's take this year's basketball team out of the equation with that, right? Because they've been great and the expectations were really high. But think about the football team this year. Like they were virtually ignored, right? Everybody's like, the last 2 years, they were kind of an afterthought. And now they come through and they beat Iowa, they beat Michigan State. They have this great 8-win season. Really very easily could have been a season where they're playing Saturday down the street from me in Indy. If that Minnesota game that they controlled and they were the better team that day, they just made too many mistakes. They'd be here had they won that game. So I think I've always tried to ask Purdue fans to kind of embrace it because I think that's when they're at their best with the chip on the shoulder. Like Purdue sports wouldn't be the same to me if the fans weren't angry about something, and I don't mean that in like a bad way. Like, I mean that like in an endearing way. Like, it's just like a very much like, I'm going to fight for this because I care deeply about my school. Like I've always loved that about Boiler fans.
Shout out to Travis Miller because, he does that more than anyone.
Yeah. Travis is a big guy. Yeah. But like even the Boiled sports guys are like that too. It's a great fan base. It is a lot of great dudes. I have many dear friends that are Purdue guys.
Yeah. And going back to your thing about how like the Michigan Wolverines or the Walmart Wolverines, I mean, that's like at Purdue, there's more of a family atmosphere in my opinion, than they have at IU just because like the quote unquote casual fans and things like that.
Yeah. Honestly, it's hard for me to speak to it because I obviously I didn't go to school there, but I can tell you from the Indiana perspective of things, like I was a real passionate, my parents were IU grads. We grew up watching IU basketball. Even though I was in the heart of UConn country when they were really ascending in the 90s and UConn got shoved down my throat, girls and guys 24/7 all the time. And so I'm still to this day, very anti UConn. But at Indiana, it was so massive, like it was just not that Purdue isn't, because Purdue's a very, you ask somebody that goes to a 2,500 person private liberal arts college to go to Purdue, they'd be like, oh my God, it's like a whole different universe. So it's all relative, right? But Indiana, you really did kind of feel like a number when you're in those gen ed classes in Ballantine Hall and there's 400 people in there. It wasn't very I love my 4 years there, 5 actually, even though I was only enrolled for 4. But it wasn't like the family kind of, but that's not what I wanted. I wanted big school far away. And that's what I got.
I kind of gravitated towards that family thing with Purdue, I think.
Yeah.
I applied to West Virginia and Tennessee and got in, and I wanted to go there so bad. And my mom was like, first of all, we're not paying for that. Second of all, you're not going that far away.
Yeah. So my parents were like, get the hell out of here. They're like, go. No, they just loved Indiana so much. And that's why they're back here retired now. We have a lot of family up in the South Bend, Plymouth, Niles, Michigan quadrant, northern to the Michigan border area and Michiana, if you will. And that's where I spent a lot of time. So it wasn't a complete culture shock to come out here, even though I grew up in the shadow of New York City in a much different place.
And then I want to talk about IU and Purdue football. Obviously, the regular season just wrapped up. Waiting for the bowls to get released. I don't know when those are coming out. I think it's sometime next week. So we'll figure out where Purdue's going. And then obviously IU didn't make it this year. But, I mean, you already talked about, who could have expected that on both sides for both of these programs?
No.
Purdue having their first 8-win season since 2007, I think. And then IU, ranked. Michael Penix was a Heisman candidate to start the year. And then, just the wheels fell off, injuries. It was a nightmare season for them, honestly.
Yeah. Sometimes you kind of envision like, okay, what's the worst case scenario? And you envision whatever that is in your head. Okay, well, maybe Penix gets hurt. Maybe they lose the Cincinnati and Iowa games to start the year. And then, okay, yeah, maybe they go 5-7. Right. And you're thinking, even 5-7 for a preseason top 20 team would have been a disaster. Sometimes the worst case scenario is even worse than you could have ever envisioned. This was a season where everything went wrong and then some, literally nothing went right for them. So I will say this though. I think we get so trapped in the moment that, we talk about, okay, well, 2020 was a fluke. Okay, well, this is Indiana's first winless season in the Big Ten in 10 years. So can I just as easily say that this season's a fluke? Like outliers, right? Like statistics. And we did this with Carson Wentz, where, well, in 2017, he was almost the MVP. Well, in 2020, he was the worst quarterback in the league. Throw both of those out. And now he's the 2018-19 version, right? Like that's essentially what he's been. And I think it's really likely that Indiana just gets back into that 5 to 7 win range where they've basically been since 2015, where, essentially if you win the bucket game, you're bowl eligible. and I think most fans would be okay with that. I do think it's harder for Indiana because you can't have a season like Northwestern has had because you're not in the West. Mm-hmm. You can't have that season. It's not possible for you. And it's never going to be possible. Indiana is, I'll even say this. I don't think they'll ever play in the Big Ten championship game. I just don't think it's ever going to happen because I just don't think it's possible for them to win that division. And, that doesn't mean that it's okay for them or excusable for them to go 2-10 and 0-9. But I think that's where they're going to be. Tom Allen, for all of his shortcomings as a game day coach, is still a really passionate guy who players gravitate to. He loves Indiana. He cares about the program. He has the full support of the – when I was at Indiana 20 years ago, nobody cared about the football team. The administration didn't care. No one cared. It was a joke. It was a MAC program. Their weight room was a joke. It was terrible. The facilities were awful. I remember going in there for the first game. It was Antoine Randall's senior year. When we went to a game, they played Utah. And, it was these dual stands. And I was like, this is a Big Ten stadium? Like, what the hell is this? So it's drastically changed from them where they actually do care about it. So I think that's where they're going to settle in. And I think with Purdue, the last 2 years, you kind of saw, you talk about bad luck. People forget they were 2-0 last year. And then just the wheels kind of fell off where they lost a bunch of close games. And, you ended up 2-4. That season could have easily gone the other way. And it's so funny how you judge teams based on, everything went right, everything went wrong. There was a lot of stuff that went right for Purdue this year. There was a lot of stuff that went wrong the last 2 years. Exactly. And sometimes it just kind of corrects himself. But, I never lost faith in Jeff Brom. I just think he gets it. He reminds me a lot of Frank Reich, where the mentality and the attitude of being aggressive and analytic based and all of that is the right way to win football games. It's sometimes going to end up, the result is sometimes going to be poor, but the process is always going to be right, and that's kind of how I've always sort of felt about him. But I would love to see Purdue get back into that like Tiller range where 7-ish, 8-win seasons are pretty normal. And then every couple of years, a lot of people point to Iowa. I think Iowa's kind of the example to follow. Every 7 or 8 years, hey, this is a 10-win team. Hey, this is a team that's got a chance to get to Indy in the Orange Bowl or whatever else. And then every other year, you're still kind of consistently in it. I think that should be kind of the bar that Purdue sets for itself. Indiana too. It's just, given their history, I think that's a little more attainable for Purdue than for Indiana.
Yeah, I'll take an 8-win year for the rest of the time, honestly.
Oh, yeah.
We don't suck anymore. Like,
when you played, you played UConn, which is basically a high school team, but you played 2 Power 5 teams in the non-league. Oregon State had a really that was a good team. Yeah. And Notre Dame, they caught Notre Dame at the right time. That was a different team in September, but still, that's you go to Notre Dame. Purdue's been playing at Notre Dame for 60 years, and I think they've won twice. So, that's always tough sledding over there.
Mm-hmm. But you kind of mentioned it with IU. To reach the pinnacle of like the Ohio State, the Michigan, Penn State, on our side, Wisconsin, honestly, who turned their season around. You want to talk about they're dominant down the stretch, except for that last game against Minnesota. But I just don't know if Purdue or IU can get in that conference championship range for very long. Like you said, it'll probably be like a 1-2 year thing, and then it's back down to earth.
Yeah, but if you can, if I were to tell you, or really any Purdue fan, hey, every 20 years you're going to go to the Rose Bowl, you'd probably sign up for that, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think I would. If I told an Indiana fan, hey, every 100 years you're going to go to the Rose Bowl, they'd probably be like, yeah, sure. So like I said, that kind of model where New Year's Six Bowl every decade and then have a bunch of, one of my favorite Purdue football memories is Drew Brees lighting up Kansas State in the Alamo Bowl. Just the Alamo Bowl, but it was awesome. They killed them. And that was a really good Kansas State team, and nobody gave Purdue a chance in that game. So it's just hard now, Dub, because fans, and you're going to see this with basketball, just watch. If Purdue falls short, everything is about just, did you win the championship? No. Okay. The season sucks. And it's a really horrible way to enjoy sports. Like, we should be able to just say, like, if Purdue goes and wins the whatever bowl, Las Vegas or whatever, if they go 9-4, that's an unbelievable season. We're celebrating. You don't get a ring for it. I don't know. Maybe the Las Vegas Bowl has a ring, but you don't get a championship ring for it. You didn't win your league, but it's still a great season that should be enjoyed. And I just wish more sports fans kind of felt that way. I'm not trying to say, well, you're Purdue, so you can never be here. Like, I'm not trying to do that, but people need to be rooted in some level of like reality. And the fact is that you could spend all the money you want and build as many facilities as you want. And Indiana and Purdue has built a lot of nice facilities. I've been in a lot of them. You're never going to be at the level that Ohio State is when it comes to that, or that Michigan is, or Texas, or, any of those schools. It's just that's not reality.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, we saw that I saw someone said that we were going to go to the Music City Bowl again, and I was like, you can keep that. We're going to play Auburn again. I was like, no, I don't want to play the SEC team again. But I mean, It's crazy. I mean, we're a Power 5 school. I mean, teams in the Big Ten are Power 5 schools. They win 6 games, or I mean, maybe they win 8, and they go and play an SEC school that's 6-6 in a bowl game, get blown out.
Yeah, if I remember right, I think there was like a slot that got skipped there, and Auburn was maybe supposed to go to like the Outback or something, and then they got sent to the Music City, and they were disappointed about it. I remember thinking to myself, okay, Purdue's going to win this game if Auburn doesn't care, because on paper, clearly Auburn was going to have the talent and athleticism advantage. And also clearly Auburn was very invested in that game, because from kickoff, that was a bloodletting. And it was tough because of the Tyler Trent story and him being there, I think, for the coin toss, if I'm not mistaken, and literally, days away from his time on earth here ending. That was a hard way for. There were so many just unbelievable, and a lot of it around Tyler. There were just so many great things about that season, and to have it end like that was kind of a sour footnote for sure.
That's probably the game I was most. I mean, I wasn't necessarily pissed off about it, but I was just sad. It was just like,
yeah.
But
it's right. I mean, you never want to see. It's like watching somebody kick your dog or something. It was just
that was rough. I'd be out there swinging. I want to talk about Notre Dame for a second, but before that, I mean, do you think that Purdue is gaining traction on IU in terms of being in terms of Indiana being a Boilermaker state, quote unquote, just in terms of like not necessarily the fans and their perceptions, because we know IU is probably always going to be bigger in terms of fan base and everything like that, but just in terms of success, especially with football and basketball.
I don't know. It's just been a dynamic that's kind of been built for several generations, and it's not unique to Indiana and Purdue. Like you see it with, I mentioned Michigan State, but Kentucky, Louisville, Alabama, Auburn. And in a lot of cases, the school that has the state's name on the jersey is the prominent school, or prominent's the wrong word. The more larger fan base, the more attention is paid to that school, right? And I think it feels like that's just how it's going to be. Like the White Sox could win 8 World Series in 10 years, and I think it's still just kind of going to be a Cubs town, maybe that'll change. I don't know. But at the same time, like, I don't know if that's even worth spending time worrying about. Purdue sports is in such a healthy place right now. Like, we spend a lot of time talking about men's basketball and football, but look at, volleyball has been such a power. The baseball program has had some good years. It sounds like soccer might be on the up and up now, where I never really considered Purdue soccer. So, a lot of things are really cooking for them right now. So I know that it's important to, make it our statement or, our state and all of that. I know that is like a rallying cry for Purdue fans, but as long as they just keep churning out wins and winning at Assembly Hall in front of a silent crowd, like, so what? Okay, it could be your state. We'll go in there and kick your ass every year again. Who cares? Like that's kind of what I would be focused on.
Yeah, I do think we kind of get caught up in all that hoopla and whatever. But like I said, obviously Notre Dame's probably had the biggest news coming out of there this week out of all Indiana teams, with Brian Kelly leaving, going down to LSU, and then all the things that came with that. I mean, what was your knee-jerk reaction when you found out that news, and then the subsequent 11-minute meeting, or it was actually like a 3-minute meeting? But
yeah, I was surprised in the sense that his last name is Kelly, for God's sake. He's a Northeastern Catholic. Like, I grew up with guys like that worship Notre Dame. And even though he didn't have personal ties to the program before he took the job, he just felt like one of those guys that was just going to be a lifer there. Right. Like, there's so much that's happened in Notre Dame football in the last 12 years that it feels like Brian Kelly's been there for 32 years. Cause it's hard to think back. Oh yeah, Charlie Weiss was the last coach, that feels like just a whole different universe and time, and like a parallel before human existence or something. But at the same time, when I thought about it more, I was like, I shouldn't be surprised. This Mel Tucker contract, I think, just kind of was a huge bomb where everybody was like, wait, Michigan State is paying what? And all these coaches started to look at that and saying, well, if Michigan State's going to pay their guy after 2 years then I want that. LSU, Notre Dame fans are going to want to hear this. We talk about general appeal with Indiana and people that didn't go there. LSU, from a football program, has more general appeal to recruit to than Notre Dame does. Because they play in the SEC. I mean, that's a big thing. But really, just there are a lot of kids that just will never go to a private Catholic school in Northern Indiana. It's that they don't want to. And that's fine. You're just reaching from a different pool. And Notre Dame has done a really good job of maximizing that. They had the number 4 recruiting class before Kelly ended up leaving. We'll see how many they hold on to. I know Marcus Freeman was a big part of a lot of those commitments. LSU doesn't have that. Notre Dame fans say, well, our academics, and it's a private Catholic school in Northern Indiana. There are a lot of people that don't want to go there, that don't want to have that campus life. They want to go and party and meet girls and whatever else. And Notre Dame, trust me, I've been on that campus many times. They do not have that atmosphere at all. So I think that LSU, in a way, is an upgrade in a lot of areas. I mean, I think we're splitting hairs. Like, if we're making a top 10 program list right now, Notre Dame is on it. LSU is on it. LSU's probably like 2 or 3 slots ahead. So they're very similar in the grand scheme of things of elite college football programs. But I think the surprise is, A, it just felt like Kelly was a lifer. And B, he's got a team that's potentially on the doorstep of a not so unrealistic playoff chance. They need a couple of things to happen, but not so unrealistic. And C, it's a really young roster. He played a lot of freshmen this year. And this was not supposed to be an 11-win team. Now, their schedule kind of fell apart. Yeah. It's not their fault that North Carolina sucked and USC and all, these teams that were preseason, even Wisconsin, they caught them at the right time of year. Graham Mertz is throwing to all of Notre Dame's linebackers for the entire fourth quarter. So that was kind of a game that was gifted to them. But I just, the timing of it was odd to me. Yes, in the wake of the Mel Tucker contract, but this is not seemingly a good time to be leaving Notre Dame. If anything, you'd be wanting to stay. And I think actually Marcus Freeman is, and he's part of this, he's only been there for a year, is inheriting a really nice situation because I think on paper next year, assuming that most of this recruiting class stays and, we'll see what happens with some NFL decisions. I mean, I think Kyle Hamilton, for instance, is gone. but you look at the rest of it and you say, this could be, again, another national contender.
Yeah. I mean, I was ecstatic when I saw Marcus Freeman got the job. That was our only move. Cause I don't think, I mean, for as good as Tommy Rees is and how much they love him at Notre Dame, I don't think he was going to be the guy. I thought it was always going to be Marcus Freeman.
You wanted to keep the class part of it, A, and B, I just think Jack Swarbrick is a really smart dude. And I think he looked at it and he said, here's a chance to have a 35-year-old head coach and a 29-year-old offensive coordinator, right? It could be the biggest disaster in the world because Freeman has no head coaching experience and Rees is 29 years old, right? It felt like last week that Tommy Rees was playing quarterback in Notre Dame, for God's sake. And that was, almost 10 years ago. But there's just never been, even under Kelly, and they did a lot of winning, there's never been something like young and fresh and cool and sexy about Notre Dame. They're so lame, like it's just, if you're into Notre Dame, you're really into Notre Dame. No one else is into Notre Dame except for people that are really into Notre Dame. And I think this is an opportunity for them they've done a lot to like revolutionize the program, and they're in a far better place than all of these old traditional powers, Nebraska, Texas, Miami, like all of those programs would dream of being where Notre Dame is right now. That's how far away they are from even reaching that level. And so I think they're actually in a good spot here. It could also go south, of course, but the last 5 years, it's just been like a real change for Notre Dame. They're still not Alabama. They're still not Ohio State. We could still LOL about them in the playoff and all of that. But you know what? Like outside of Alabama, Clemson, and Ohio State, they've been right there. And Georgia, they've been right there.
Yeah, I mean, you said that about Purdue and IU about getting to the conference championship. I think Notre Dame kind of has that same feel about being in the playoff and winning another national championship. But I mean, I just thought of this when we were talking. I mean, what would be the top 5 college football jobs if they were all open?
Oh, if we're just talking jobs and not like ranking programs, there is absolutely no reason that I can think of that you shouldn't be able to win and win huge at Texas. I don't get it. I don't know why that's been such a struggle for them. And even if you look at their history, like Mac Brown had a great run and they had a great run in like the 70s, I think. Really outside of that, like Texas, Oklahoma has the track record that Texas should have. Like I've never really understood why it's come so easy for Oklahoma, where they've been this consistent power forever, really outside of the 90s where they had a little bit of a downturn, and Texas just has had like this. Austin is awesome. It's a great school. You have umpteen different blue chip recruits in your backyard. They're moving to the SEC now. So, that's a little bit of a double-edged sword where, yes, you're in the SEC recruiting appeal, but also, it's a little bit tougher in that league than to beat up on K-State and programs like that. But Texas to me has always felt like that should be like the number one job, where because they've been so much better. I think I would actually say that Ohio State is the best job. But I would put Texas 2. I'd probably just I think you have to put Alabama 3. People might get mad that it's not 1 or 2. Alabama is clearly the greatest program that there is, but as far as jobs, I think I might put that 3. All of these fan bases are really tough to deal with. Another job where it should be a monster and their league sucks. And I never understand why they have any downturn at all as SC out in LA. And I think that's why you saw Lincoln Riley take that job, because he knows that that's a sleeping giant. So I'd probably put USC 4, 5th. I'm trying to cast a wide net here and not just pick like another SEC school, because Florida is another one where it's like, why would Florida ever go like 8-5? Right? It's Florida. Like Miami is an elite institution, and Miami's like a smaller school. I don't know if people realize that. Like Florida's this big state school. The Florida's an elite school too, but I'd probably lean towards that. Some people might say Michigan. I can't stand Michigan. I love Harbaugh. I've always been a big Harbaugh guy, but I can't stand Michigan.
Why don't you like Michigan that much? I don't have a problem with him personally.
They talk about winningest program and most championships and all of that. A lot of that was built in like 1905 when there were like 10 football teams and football was 2 words.
Yeah.
My favorite stat, and this is why I'm really panicking about them potentially being in the playoff because I don't want to lose sight of this. My favorite stat is that in the last 70 plus years, they've won half of a championship. And I don't know if people realize that. Like, we talk about how long Notre Dame has been irrelevant and all of that. Notre Dame won titles in the 70s. They won in 88. They were, back in the mix in the 90s, in the Holtz era. Michigan has basically just gone like 9-3 for like 80 straight years. Bo Schembechler, who they built a statue to, his whole MO was to go like 10-0 and then lose whatever bowl game they were playing in. So, literally since 1949, Michigan has won a half of a championship, and it was that 97 team that they split with Nebraska. And, they talk about how great of a program they are. And you think about all the teams that have won tons of titles in that span, and Michigan's not one of them. And there's an arrogance, like, Michigan man, and like, I hate their fight song. I mean, how long of a podcast do you want to do here, W? You want me to just list all the reasons I hate Michigan? Because I will.
Oh, I hate Ohio State more than them, and I honestly don't even like Ohio State's not that. They're not even.
My pool's poisoned because 2 of the best men that were in my wedding are huge Ohio natives, huge Ohio State fans. I have many people in my life who don't even know each other that love Ohio State, and so I've always I didn't cry any tears for Ohio State. Don't get me wrong when they lost, but I've always pulled for them in that matchup.
I mean, going back to those jobs, I think I'd have to go USC 1, Texas 2.
That's fine. I'm fine with that.
Probably Bama at 3. I want to put Notre Dame in there. I don't know why. I want to put Notre Dame.
I think it's tough because of where they're located, and there is somewhat of an academic standard and bar and all of that you have to cross. I think there is a little more of there's some more hurdles involved with like politics and stuff like that at Notre Dame that you're not going to get at like, Auburn, where they're like, just win. How much do we have to pay you? We got to pay this guy. Okay, we'll pay him too. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's just a different kind of a standard, I feel like.
Yeah.
I mean, Oklahoma's a great job. If you don't mind living in Norman, Oklahoma, in the middle of nowhere, like it's a great program. It's a passionate fan base. You are the team in that state. Great history. I love their colors. You know what I mean? Like there's a lot to like.
Yeah. I can't pick.
Oregon?
Would
you say Oregon? Is that a great? You got the Nike money. It's still kind of sexy and cool.
Yeah, but they're losing that. I remember when I was in like what grade? Maybe 2011 when they went and played Auburn.
Yeah, they played Cam Newton's team and lost. Yeah.
It literally everyone and their brother was like, "Oh, I'm an Oregon fan now," just because of their jerseys and the Nike stuff and all that. So I've never really liked Oregon, and they beat Purdue twice in a row on like last second plays, basically.
Do you remember the Ralph Bolden game against Oregon, the running back, where I think he went for like 200 yards or something, didn't he? And they almost won.
Mm-hmm.
Would that have been Joey Elliott in 2009 or what? I'm trying to think of what year that would have been that they played Oregon. I'll have to go back and look.
I think they played them in 2008 and 2009.
Okay. I meant the game. I think it was the game at Oregon that Bolden had the big game.
I think that was 2009.
Okay.
Are you looking it up right now?
I am. Yeah, it was at Oregon. Yeah. That 2009 team, by the way, should have been a bowl team. That was one of those teams that was much better than what their record said they were. They lost a bunch of close games. They got destroyed at Wisconsin, but they lost a bunch of close games. They should have beaten Notre Dame. Remember, Danny Hope took that timeout, and everybody's like, "What are you doing?" And it set up Notre Dame's 4th and goal play. I think it was Clausen hit Rudolph in the end zone. There was a lot of bad luck stuff that happened that year to Purdue.
Yeah, I had Joe Holland on the podcast.
Wow, that's a name I haven't heard in a long time. He's a dentist, right?
He's in the Eagle Creek area. So
yeah, because he's a Chittard guy, if I remember right. So I knew he came back to Indy.
Yeah, and he was talking about that 2009 team. Like they easily could have been a 8, 9, 10 win team if things played out right.
They won at Michigan and they beat Ohio State and they finished 5-7.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's almost like that's really hard to do to win in Ann Arbor and then beat Ohio State and then not make a bowl.
Yeah. I mean, those years were weird for us because we went like we started off really bad that year, I believe. And then we had that upswing and then it just went like it was like a roller coaster because then we ended up losing like 6 straight in 2010, 2009, 2010. I can't remember. And then the next year
09, yeah.
Caesar's
09 and I got a cheat sheet here. They lost 5 straight before beating. They were 1-5 when they beat Ohio State, which was a shock.
Mm-hmm.
But all those games were close. They lost by 2 at Oregon. The Notre Dame game that I mentioned, they lost by 3. They lost to Northern Illinois, but that was the Northern Illinois team that I think was really good, wasn't it?
They had Chandler Harness that year.
Yeah. Or maybe
they're a sneaky program.
Yeah, maybe I'm mixing that up with somebody. But they always, they always had a loss like that. Like, remember they lost to Rice one year. With Hope, they always had like one of those like what losses, I feel like, in all of his seasons.
I mean, Painter was like that too, a little bit. In those like obviously like 2012 through 2014-ish, we were losing to like North Florida at home. And we lost our season opener in 2011, 2012 to Bucknell.
Yeah, I remember the North Florida loss, and that's when you were just like, that was kind of one of the low points where you're like, what's happening? Like, was this Hummel Moore Johnson thing just a one-off fluke? Like I was really concerned about them at that point.
Yeah, then we lost I think we lost to Gardner Webb too. That
sounds right.
Which is like, no one even knows where that is, so you shouldn't lose to him. But
yeah, there were some dark days, but Painter really kind of found himself. I think after that class, he was like chasing that high of, okay, well, I got to get the next one. So he was, and I think he'd tell you this. He was like, okay, Tyrone Johnson, Ronnie Johnson, sure. Like, what's their star rating? Like, bring him in. AJ Hammond's actually ended up having a nice career, but didn't necessarily ever like kind of fit Purdue. But that Matthias Haas, PJ Thompson class, it's everything that you've seen after that started, I think, right. I think Rayfeld Davis, if you're talking just individually, was the person that kind of helped kickstart the culture, but that class was really kind of what changed everything for them.
And when I had him on the podcast, this was August of 2019. Yeah, 2019, so it was before the pandemic. That he actually mentioned that of trying to get like certain guys that were just like the star power or uber athletic instead of trying to find guys that fit within the program. And because we have a guy like PJ Thompson, and then we bring in his brother. They're, fairly similar players. We always have some random white dude that can shoot, like Klein, Matthias, now Sasha Stavanovich. Always have the 7-footer. Normally an undersized 4, except for first. First is what, 6'10", 6'11".
Yeah, killing
it.
Yeah, he could really play.
This year, this is our shot. This team is better than the 2019, in my opinion.
Oh yeah, I don't think it's close, especially when you talk about the depth, because we could sit here and talk about Moore and Johnson and Hummel all we want, but when you start getting at the end of it, it's like Keaton Grant and I might be having some of my nears, Lewis Jackson, guys like that, who are nice players. Don't get me wrong, but not like this.
I was gonna say I can't stand for any Lou Jack slander. He's my guy.
Yeah. They have 2 starting 5s, as they say. Like you could really take all 10 of those guys and find starting roles for them on most teams.
Well, it's like I was talking about this with someone the other day. Your team is loaded when you redshirt the Gatorade Player of the Year in Indiana.
Yeah, and you get these guys to agree to it willingly. Like it'd be really easy for Mason Gillis or Brandon Newman or whoever to be like, "What are you talking about? I'm not redshirt. I'm going somewhere else. I got an offer from this school. They're not going to redshirt me." And that's just it's so cliched and Tyree culture, but it really is true. Like you get people to buy in like that, and Matt Painter and his staff have just done it better than anybody.
No doubt. And we got to wrap this thing up fairly quickly, but I wanted to get your opinion on IU. Obviously, Mike Woodson came in. What are they, 6-1 now? They just lost to Syracuse. What have been your first impressions on this first year under Woodson so far?
I think it's going to take some time for them to kind of figure out who they are and where all the pieces fit, because Indiana's got a lot of experience, but they don't have a lot of experience with these guys playing together, and that's always going to be a challenge. They're so sloppy. The turnover stuff just absolutely has to get cleaned up. But if we're talking positives, it looks like it's going to be a modern offense that actually can score points, like more than like 45 points, which is nice after the last 4 years of what they brought to the table. And in college basketball, if you've got a guy, you're going to be pretty good. And they've got one in Trey Jackson-Davis. You saw it with Carson Edwards, and I'm not saying this team isn't going to get where that team got, but I remember in December of that year where it was like Carson Edwards and a bunch of stiffs, right? And you're like, this team's not even going to make the tournament. And he had to kind of carry them through. He scored like 40 points against Texas and they lost. He scored like 39 against another team. I think they lost that game too. And he just kind of had to carry them through. And then the team kind of grew together. And I think Indiana is going to kind of grow together. It feels weird to be optimistic about Indiana basketball, but I feel good about where they're going to be. Like, I think this is a team that's got a chance to be like hang around the fringe of the top 25. And if the draw goes right and if things go right, I think they could be like a team that wins an NCAA tournament game or maybe even makes the second weekend, which considering where Indiana's been, if you make the second weekend, that's pretty darn good. Hell, making the tournament is pretty darn good considering where they've been. But just kind of figuring out where the pieces are. I love what Xavier Johnson's brought. Point guard was a big aspect of, and I feel bad saying it because he's a nice kid and he's a local guy, but Rob Finney is such an offensive liability that he was unplayable at times, especially down the stretch. Well, he's a good defender. Well, who cares? He can't score. And he plays scared on offense, and you can't have that. So I think he's been a really welcome addition for them. I think they'll figure it out. Woodson's a smart guy, and he was smart enough to put Fife and a bunch of guys that know the game, college game, on his staff. I hope they turn it around because I know Purdue fans would love to see them down forever, but it would be nice for Indiana to be a competent basketball program again.
I would love for just once in my life to see IU Purdue top 5 matchup, just once. And
it'd be nice because really you're younger than me. I mean, I came in around the end of the night Katie years where, the late 90s, they were making the tournament, both of them every year, but they weren't like contending for Big Tens or anything like that. And since in this century, all the years where Purdue's been really good, Indiana's been really bad. And the few years that Indiana was really good, like 2002 when they made the run, Purdue was terrible. Obviously, we just talked about the 12 and 13 years with Crean that were really good. Purdue was awful. Essentially, they've just gone like this, So it would be nice to see them both. I was at the 08 game in Bloomington. So this would have been the baby Boilers year. Yeah. Hummel, Moore, Johnson were freshmen, and DJ White, Eric Gordon team. And I think they were both ranked in the top 20, or they were both ranked. And it was near the end of the year. And that was a great game and a great atmosphere. But off the top of my head, I think that's the only real time that I remember like both teams being good at the same time.
Yeah, because either, like you said, has like been up and down. I mean, it's kind of polar opposites. And then I think a couple of years ago when Purdue was like middling, so was IU. I mean, we still beat them, but yeah, I mean, it's not really a rivalry so much anymore. It's been weird.
Well, it certainly hasn't been the last, how long's the streak now? I've lost count. 5 years. Is it 10 in a row? What is it?
I would love it if it was 10.
Is it 8?
I want to say 6 or 7.
I think is it 9? Was there a one-off that was somewhere in there? I feel like it's 8 or 9 is the winning streak. Like they won the last game of the Crean years, and then 2 and 16, 17, 2 and 17, 18, 2 and 18, 19. Tunes. I don't know.
We lost to them when AJ Hammonds and Rafael Davis were still playing on a bad goaltending call at IU. So that had to be 25th.
Well, I know Indiana won the home game against them in 16 when IU won the Big Ten outright. And I think that's Indiana's last win in the series. So that was
had to be, yeah.
Here, I've got it right here, so I'll look it up. I feel like it's 9 in a row, but it might be I might be off there. All right, here we go.
Oh, 9 games in a row or 9 years?
No,
I thought you're talking.
It only dates back to. I know it only dates back to 2016. I was trying to think of how many games in a row it's been. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. It is 9.
Okay.
Yeah, and but 12 of 13.
Yeah.
So and really, I mean, if you go back to the early Crean's first year, and it's hard to count those games too. I mean, Indiana was climbing out of a crater, but still, it's been a long run of success for Purdue.
Mm-hmm. No doubt. Well, I mean, we went like an hour 30, and you got your mic in your hand. So I'm gonna wrap this up. But I mean, as always, I appreciate you being there for me when I needed advice and coming on the show and being so gracious to me. I mean, I've told you this, but you've been someone I've looked up to for a very long time, listening to you. But I mean, thank you again. And I mean, I'm sure we'll do this again sometime soon.
Yeah, man. Anytime. You know that. You got my number. So give me a shout whenever you need anything that I can help with as my relevance fades in my old age. And I try to hold on to whatever of it I still have left here in this city. But I appreciate the invite. Always fun to come on your show. And congrats to you for all your success, man. Stay driven, stay hungry out there.
Thank you. I appreciate that.